Bear hit by car and left to die on the roadside. Then a vet sees it, and everything changes. The first snowflakes of the season drifted through the headlight beams as Dr. Emily Carter navigated the winding mountain road. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and her shoulders ached from 12 hours of back-to-back appointments at the Northern Arizona Wildlife Clinic. Emily rolled her neck, feeling vertebrae pop in protest. One more bend, and she'd be home. As her truck rounded the curve, something dark lay sprawled across the gravel shoulder. Emily slowed, squinting through the windshield, a fallen branch perhaps, or... Her heart quickened. An animal. She pulled over, grabbing the emergency medical kit she kept behind the passenger seat. After 13 years as the region's only wildlife veterinarian, stopping for roadside casualties had become reflex. Most were already gone. Some could be saved. All deserved attention. The beam of her flashlight swept over black fur. She thought at first, maybe a lab mix, abandoned in these remote woods. But as she drew closer, the distinctive rounded ears and blunt snout became unmistakable, a bear cub. Emily froze. Her lungs seized as if plunged into ice water. A memory flashed, her mother's screams, the sight of blood on canvas, the campground ranger's shotgun. She was 10 years old again, watching her mother being loaded into an ambulance after a black bear attack that left permanent scars across her shoulders. I'll never go near one of those monsters, she had promised herself that day. Never. Yet here she stood, 32 years later, flashlight trembling in her hand as she assessed the small, crumpled form. The cub was young, probably 6 to 8 months old, born earlier that spring. Its breathing came shallow and irregular. A gash ran along its hindquarters, not catastrophic, but deep enough to expose muscle. Without intervention, infection would set in by morning. Not my problem, Emily whispered, stepping back. The Forest Service has protocols for this. But the nearest ranger station was an hour away. By the time anyone arrived, the temperature would drop below freezing. She raised her phone. No service, typical for this stretch of road. The cub's eyes flickered open, dark, frightened pools reflecting her flashlight beam. A soft moan escaped its throat, so painfully vulnerable it made Emily's chest tighten. "Damn it," she muttered, already reaching for her gloves. The drive to her cabin took 20 minutes, with the bear wrapped in an emergency blanket on the passenger floor. Emily kept glancing down, expecting it to suddenly revive and lunge at her throat. But the cub remained distressingly still, only the subtle rise and fall of its rib cage confirming life. Emily's cabin perched on 5 acres at the forest's edge, its weathered logs and green tin roof nestled among ponderosa pines. Behind the main house sat a converted woodshed that served as her makeshift clinic for wildlife cases too complex to leave at the main facility in town. She'd treated everything from poisoned eagles to orphaned elk calves within those walls, but never a bear. She carried the cub into the clinic, its weight substantial but manageable, perhaps 60 pounds, though it should have been closer to 80 or 90 this close to winter. Under the bright surgical lights, she could see protruding ribs beneath the matted fur. This cub has been without its mother for some time. Car must have been the final straw, she murmured, carefully placing it on the examination table. Emily worked methodically, her professional instincts overriding her personal fear. She started an 4-line with fluids and antibiotics, cleaned and sutured the leg wound, took X-rays that revealed 2 cracked ribs, but thankfully no internal bleeding. Throughout the procedure, the cub remained sedated, occasionally twitching but never fully conscious. Only when she'd finished, when the bear lay bandaged and monitored, its vitals stabilizing, did Emily sink into her desk chair and allow her hands to shake. "What the hell am I doing?" she asked the empty room. The wildlife regulations were clear: black bears were not to be rehabilitated by private individuals. Any injured bear should be reported to state authorities, who would either euthanize it or, rarely, place it in a licensed facility. Bears that associated humans with safety or food became problem bears. And problem bears inevitably became dead bears. Emily knew all this. She'd given lectures on it, written papers, testified at state wildlife hearings. Yet she couldn't bring herself to make the call. Not tonight. Not while looking at this fragile creature fighting for life. Just until morning, she promised herself, setting an alarm for dawn. Then I'll do the right thing. She named the bear Hope, not out of sentiment, she told herself, but because everyone needed a designation in her patient logs. It was simply easier than writing black bear cub, female, unknown age in her records. That night, Emily dreamed of campfires and screams and blood on canvas. She woke gasping, tangled in sweat-damp sheets, the phantom smell of bear musk in her nostrils. Dawn arrived with 6 inches of early snow, the phone lines down, and Hope still alive. 3 days passed before the roads cleared enough for Emily to consider transporting the bear. 3 days of changing bandages, administering medication, and watching Hope's condition gradually improve. The cub spent most of her time sleeping in the large metal crate Emily had lined with straw and heating pads, occasionally accepting small amounts of watered-down formula from a specialized syringe. "You're not supposed to hand-feed bears," Emily lectured the cub as she cleaned the wound on the 3rd morning. "It creates dangerous dependencies. I could lose my license for this." Hope blinked at her with what Emily could have sworn was skepticism. "Don't look at me like that. As soon as you can stand without falling over, you're going to the rehabilitation center in Phoenix." But even as she said it, Emily knew the center wouldn't take a black bear this close to winter. They'd recommend euthanasia, especially for one too young to survive hibernation alone, yet old enough to resist human handling. Hope would slip through the cracks of the system. On the 4th day, the cub stood shakily, sniffing the air with cautious interest. Emily had begun leaving native foods, berries, acorns, and small trout from the stream behind her property, alongside the specialized formula. Hope investigated each offering, eventually consuming most with hesitant enthusiasm. "Good girl," Emily found herself saying. "That's what you should be eating." She caught herself and frowned. Anthropomorphizing was a cardinal sin in wildlife medicine. Bears weren't good. They weren't girls. They were wild animals, with instincts and behaviors shaped by millions of years of evolution, not by human moral frameworks. Yet as days stretched into a week, Emily found the walls between professional distance and personal connection crumbling. She noticed how Hope's ears perked at the sound of Emily's voice, how the cub would pause her feeding when Emily entered the room, not in fear but in acknowledgement, how those dark eyes followed her movements with what could only be described as recognition. "This is temporary," Emily reminded herself each night as she updated her secret patient logs. "She's recovering well. Another week, maybe 2, and she'll be strong enough to release." But Emily knew the odds. A cub Hope's age needed another year with her mother to learn crucial survival skills: where to den for winter, how to find food, which areas to avoid. Without that guidance, Hope's chances diminished dramatically. Emily began spending evenings researching black bear behavior, scouring scientific journals for cases of successful rehabilitations and reintroductions. The literature was sparse and discouraging. Most rehabilitated cubs either died within months of release or became nuisance bears that required relocation or euthanasia. 2 weeks after the roadside rescue, Emily sat cross-legged on the clinic floor, watching Hope investigate a hollowed log filled with hidden berries, an enrichment activity designed to stimulate natural foraging behaviors. The cub's limp had improved, though she still favored her right hind leg. "What am I going to do with you?" Emily murmured. Hope looked up, berry juice staining her muzzle, and made a soft chuffing sound. Something warm and unexpected expanded in Emily's chest. For the first time since her mother's accident, she looked at a bear and didn't feel fear. On the 17th night, a storm howled through the mountains, rattling the cabin windows and sending pine branches scraping against the roof. Emily sat before the fireplace with a glass of Cabernet and a dog-eared copy of Thoreau's Walden when she heard it, a sound too deliberate to be wind, too rhythmic to be falling branches. Hope was pacing her enclosure, agitated in a way Emily hadn't seen before. The cub alternated between standing on her hind legs at the crate door and pressing her nose to the clinic's north-facing window, making urgent woofing sounds. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, checking the cub's bandages for signs of infection or discomfort. Finding none, she frowned. "Are you in pain?" Hope ignored her, continuing her distressed movements. Emily stepped outside onto the porch, shining her flashlight toward the tree-line. The storm had passed, leaving behind a bone-deep chill and a sky scattered with stars. Nothing moved in the immediate clearing. She was about to go back inside when she heard it, a low, pained moan carrying through the night air. It wasn't Hope's voice, but something similar, something larger. Emily's blood went cold. Grabbing her rifle from above the fireplace, loaded with tranquilizer darts rather than bullets, she followed the sound into the forest. Hope's agitation increased as Emily left her, woofing and turning to frustrated whines. The beam of Emily's headlamp cut through the darkness as she tracked the sound nearly half a mile into the woods. In a shallow ravine, illuminated by moonlight and the sweep of her light, lay an adult female black bear. The animal was massive, at least 300 pounds, and severely injured. One paw was caught in what appeared to be an illegal trap, the metal teeth cutting deep into the flesh. The bear had clearly been struggling for days. The ground around her was torn up, pine needles and dirt matted with blood. Her eyes, when they caught the light, showed exhaustion beyond fear. Emily stood frozen, her knuckles white around the rifle. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to call authorities, to let nature take its inevitable course. But then she saw a distinctive white scar running across the bear's snout, the same mark she'd noticed in photographs she'd taken of Hope, wondering if it was a birthmark or an old injury. "You're her mother," Emily whispered. The bear's eyes fixed on her, not with aggression but with what Emily could only interpret as resignation. The fight had gone out of her. Emily thought of her own mother, of hospital rooms and physical therapy sessions, of nightmares that had shaped both their lives. She thought of Hope, pacing anxiously in her clinic, somehow sensing her mother's distress. With trembling hands, Emily raised the rifle and fired a tranquilizer dart into the bear's shoulder. "I'm going to help you," she said, waiting for the sedative to take effect. "God help me, I'm going to try." Transporting an unconscious adult bear half a mile through forest terrain in the middle of the night ranked among the most physically demanding tasks Emily had ever attempted. It took 3 trips with a game cart, every muscle screaming in protest, sweat freezing against her skin despite the exertion. By dawn, both bears lay in her clinic, Hope in her familiar crate, her mother on a reinforced examination table Emily normally reserved for elk or moose. The older bear would need to be moved to a larger, secure space before she regained consciousness, but first Emily needed to address the mangled paw. The damage was severe. The trap, a barbaric toothed contraption illegal in Arizona for decades, had nearly severed 2 digits and crushed the metacarpal bones. Infection had already set in, evidenced by the swelling and heat radiating from the wound. For hours, Emily cleaned, debrided, and reconstructed what she could of the paw. She administered antibiotics, fluids, and pain medication. Throughout the procedure, Hope watched from her crate, unusually calm now that her mother was present. When Emily finally stepped back, exhausted beyond measure, she knew the prognosis was guarded at best. The bear might survive, but full mobility of that paw seemed unlikely. She converted her garage into a makeshift recovery den, reinforcing the walls and creating a secure enclosure large enough for the mother bear. When the sedation began wearing off, Emily moved her into the new space, then cautiously introduced Hope. The reunion pierced something in Emily's heart. Hope approached her mother with tentative steps, sniffing and making soft sounds. The older bear, still groggy, raised her massive head and gently nudged her cub. Hope immediately curled against her mother's side, making contented humming sounds Emily had never heard before. Watching them, Emily felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She thought of her own mother, who had never fully recovered from her bear encounter, not physically, not emotionally. The attack had transformed a vibrant, outdoorsy woman into someone who jumped at shadows, who refused to camp again, who passed her fear to her daughter like an unwanted inheritance. Yet here Emily stood, voluntarily sharing her home with the very creatures that had haunted her nightmares. She named the mother bear Faith. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm as strange as it was unexpected. Emily divided her time between her regular veterinary practice and her secret patients, constructing an elaborate lie about a research sabbatical to explain her reduced hours at the clinic in town. Faith's recovery proved slower than Hope's, complicated by the severity of her injuries and what Emily suspected was the beginning of hibernation physiology. Black bears in northern Arizona typically entered winter dens by late November, and December had arrived with consistent snow and freezing temperatures. "You're supposed to be sleeping," Emily told Faith one evening as she checked the healing paw. "Your metabolism should be slowing, not dealing with this trauma." Faith regarded her with amber eyes that seemed almost contemplative. The bear had never shown aggression toward Emily despite being fully conscious during treatments. She accepted medicine hidden in honey or peanut butter, allowed wound cleanings with minimal restraint, and even seemed to recognize the routine of Emily's examinations. It defied everything Emily had been taught about wild bear behavior. Hope, meanwhile, continued improving, her coat regaining luster, her frame filling out with proper nutrition. She watched everything Emily did with bright curiosity, especially when it involved her mother's care. Emily knew she had crossed professional boundaries beyond recovery. She was no longer rehabilitating wildlife with appropriate distance, she was living with bears, learning their personalities, forming connections that wildlife management protocols explicitly warned against. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it, not when she observed the gentle interactions between mother and cub, not when she realized her own nightmares had receded, replaced by dreams of forests and dens and silent communication. By mid-December, Faith's paw had healed enough for Emily to consider the next phase. The bears couldn't stay, that much was non-negotiable. But releasing them amid deep winter would be a death sentence. They needed a winter den to complete their hibernation cycle, a safe place where Faith could conserve energy and Hope could continue growing. Emily spent days scouting potential locations, hiking remote canyons where human intrusion seemed unlikely. She finally found it, a natural cave formation beneath a rocky overhang, sheltered from wind and hidden from casual observation. It would require sedating and transporting the bears again, but it offered their best chance at natural hibernation. On the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, Emily prepared for the release. She had stocked the cave with insulating straw and native foods, created a small pool of fresh water that would freeze slowly due to its depth, and confirmed no human trails approached within a mile. "This is goodbye," she told them as she administered the sedatives. "You don't belong here. You never did." Hope's eyes held hers until they drooped closed, and Emily felt something twist inside her chest. After transporting them to the den site and arranging them comfortably inside, Emily sat in the gathering dusk, waiting to ensure they recovered safely from sedation. Faith woke first, groggy but alert, immediately checking on Hope before examining their new surroundings. She showed no inclination to leave the den, seeming to recognize its purpose as winter shelter. Hope stirred last, blinking at Emily with what seemed like confusion, then recognition. The cub made a soft sound and extended her snout toward Emily's hand. Emily hesitated, then gently touched the cub's head, the first direct contact she'd allowed herself. "Be wild," she whispered. "Be free." Then she backed away, leaving the bears to the rhythm of nature, to the long sleep of winter, and whatever spring would bring. Emily's cabin felt cavernous in their absence. She returned to her regular schedule at the wildlife clinic, threw herself into paperwork and procedures, and tried to convince herself she'd done the right thing, the ethical thing. Sometimes at night, she stood on her porch and gazed toward the mountains, wondering if they were sleeping peacefully. If Faith's paw was continuing to heal. If Hope was dreaming of spring berries and summer streams. Winter passed. Snowdrifts receded, exposing pale green shoots. Beneath aspens unfurled delicate leaves. Birds returned from southern migrations. The world awakened. Emily did not check on the den. She knew better than to risk disturbing a hibernating bear, and later, she didn't want to habituate them to her presence. Faith and Hope needed to forge their own path without human interference. But she thought of them every day. By early March, wildflowers carpeted the forest floor, and the clinic overflowed with spring cases, orphaned fawns, birds fallen from nests, a bobcat with porcupine quills embedded in its muzzle. Emily worked 14-hour days, collapsing into bed each night too exhausted to dream. Then, on a misty morning in late March, she opened her front door to find Hope sitting on her porch. Emily froze, coffee mug slipping from her fingers to shatter on the wooden planks. The bear before her was unmistakably Hope, the distinctive white marking on her chest, the slight favoring of her right hind leg, but changed. Fuller. Her winter coat beginning to shed in patches. Her frame larger, more mature, and unmistakably pregnant. Hope's abdomen curved with the distinctive swell of late-term pregnancy. Black bears mate in summer with delayed implantation, allowing the fertilized eggs to develop only if the female gains sufficient weight for hibernation. The cubs would typically be born during winter den, blind and weighing less than a pound. For Hope to appear this pregnant in spring meant something had gone wrong with the timing. "Where's your mother?" Emily asked, scanning the tree-line. Faith was nowhere in sight. Hope made a soft chuffing sound and waddled closer, her movements careful and deliberate. She stopped at Emily's feet, looking up with those familiar dark eyes. Emily's heart pounded. This was precisely the scenario wildlife managers feared, a rehabilitated bear returning to human habitation. She should call authorities. She should haze the bear away. She should follow protocol. Instead, she whispered, "Are you in trouble, girl?" Hope's only answer was to lower herself to the porch, her pregnant belly pressing against the wooden boards, her breathing labored. Emily recognized the signs of imminent labor. "Oh God," she breathed, "not here, not now." But nature followed its own timetable. Hope had returned to the only safe place she knew to deliver her cubs. Emily couldn't turn her away, not when every instinct, professional and personal, told her this young bear needed help. With shaking hands, Emily called the clinic, claiming a family emergency that would keep her away for several days. Then she transformed her living room into a makeshift birthing den, dark, warm, lined with soft blankets and straw. Hope followed her inside without hesitation, circling the prepared space before settling in with a heavy sigh. Emily kept her distance, providing water and small amounts of food but respecting the natural process unfolding. Hours passed. Hope shifted positions occasionally, groaning or digging at the blankets. Emily documented everything, knowing she was witnessing something few wildlife veterinarians ever saw, the natural birth process of a black bear. As twilight gathered, Emily heard a soft, high-pitched squeal, then another. In the dim light, she made out tiny, rat-sized forms against Hope's dark fur, newborn cubs, their eyes sealed shut, their bodies nearly hairless. Emily counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 cubs, when the average litter was 2 or 3. Hope would have her paws full. The new mother licked each cub methodically, guiding them to her teats with gentle nudges. The miracle of it, this wild creature who had returned to a human dwelling, yet remained utterly bare in her behaviors, brought tears to Emily's eyes. She backed away, giving Hope privacy for this most intimate process. From the kitchen, she called the one person she trusted with her secret. Michael Chen had been the emergency room physician who treated Emily's mother after the bear attack. Now, 32 years later, he served as the regional medical director and occasionally assisted Emily with wildlife cases requiring specialized care. They had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared dedication to healing. "I need you," Emily said when he answered, "but you can't tell anyone why." Michael arrived an hour later, his weathered face grave as she led him to the dimly lit living room. He stopped short at the sight of Hope and her newborns. "Emily," he breathed, "what have you done?" She told him everything, the roadside rescue, Faith's recovery, the winter release, Hope's return. Michael listened without interruption, his expression shifting from concern to fascination. 5 cubs, he said finally, crouching at a safe distance to observe. "That's unusual." "Too many," Emily agreed, especially for a first-time mother. They watched as Hope attended to her babies, her movements gentler than Emily would have thought possible for a creature with such powerful jaws and claws. The smallest cub, however, seemed to struggle more than its siblings, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. By morning, that cub lay still. Hope nudged it repeatedly, licking and prodding, but the tiny body remained motionless. Emily felt her throat tighten as Hope made a low, mournful sound, a vocalization she'd never heard from a bear before. "She knows," Michael whispered. "She understands death." Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had lost patience before, it came with the territory in wildlife medicine. But witnessing Hope's grief struck deeper somehow, connecting to her own losses, her own fears. Hope continued mourning her lost cub, lying motionless for hours, refusing food, growling softly whenever Emily approached. The remaining 4 cubs nursed and slept, unaware of their mother's distress or their siblings' absence. In this heavy silence, Emily and Michael sat together in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones over untouched coffee. "What's your plan?" Michael asked finally. Emily ran a hand through her tangled hair. "I don't have one. This wasn't supposed to happen. You can't keep them here. I know that. And you can't report them without risking your license." Emily nodded. The professional consequences would be severe: harboring protected wildlife, interfering with natural processes, potentially habituating bears to human contact, everything she'd worked against in her career. "They need to return to the wild," she said, "but not until the cubs are strong enough. And not here, where hunters might find them." Michael studied her face. "You care about her?" It wasn't a question, but Emily answered anyway. "Yes. More than I should." His hand covered hers on the table, warm, steady. "Then I'll help you." In that moment, Emily felt something shift between them, a connection deeper than their professional relationship, a shared secret that bound them together. Michael had been present for the beginning of her bear trauma all those years ago. Now he was here for what felt like its resolution. The days that followed established a delicate balance. Emily converted her entire cabin into a bear sanctuary, boarding up windows to create the darkness cubs would experience in a natural den, minimizing human sounds and scents, restricting entry to only herself and Michael. Hope recovered from her grief, focusing her attention on the surviving cubs. Emily documented their development with scientific precision: the gradual darkening of their fur, the increasing coordination of their movements, the first opening of their eyes at around 5 weeks. Michael visited daily, bringing supplies and taking over observation so Emily could maintain appearances at her regular practice. Together they developed a plan for eventual release, a remote location Michael knew from his hunting days, before he'd given up the sport to focus on conservation. "It's perfect," he told Emily as they pored over maps one evening. "Natural water source, plenty of cover, good food options, and most importantly, minimal human traffic." Emily nodded, but anxiety gnawed at her. "The cubs will be vulnerable for over a year. Bears this habituated to humans rarely succeed in the wild." Michael's expression softened. "They're not as habituated as you think. You've been careful. Hope is teaching them what they need to know." It was true. Emily had established strict protocols: no direct handling of the cubs, no verbal communication directed at them, food left discreetly rather than presented. Hope, meanwhile, had proven herself an attentive mother, teaching through example the essential skills her offspring would need. Emily watched in fascination as Hope demonstrated hunting techniques using stuffed toys Emily provided, stalking, pouncing, the precise application of teeth and claws. The bear showed her cubs how to dig for roots in the soil of large planters Emily brought inside, how to recognize and respond to potential threats, how to climb the reinforced indoor structures Michael had built. "She's compensating," Emily told Michael one night, as they observed Hope teaching a cub to break open a hollow log for hidden food. "She knows this environment isn't natural, so she's adapting her teaching." Michael nodded. "Bears are smarter than most people give them credit for. Not just instinct, actual problem-solving intelligence." As the cubs grew, Emily began preparing for their release. She researched potential sites, considered timing, planned transportation logistics. The goal was to find a location with abundant natural food sources, minimal human presence, and suitable denning options for the following winter. But as Emily investigated her first choice site, she discovered disturbing evidence: snare marks on trees, shell casings on the ground, hidden trail cameras that didn't belong to any research or conservation organization she knew. Poachers, she told Michael grimly. They're monitoring bear movements in the area. Black bear hunting was legal in Arizona with proper permits and during designated seasons, but poaching remained a persistent problem, especially for mother bears with cubs, which were protected year-round. If Hope and her family were released in an area under poacher surveillance, their chances of survival plummeted. Emily and Michael spent frantic days scouting alternative locations, finally settling on a site deep in the Coconino National Forest, farther from Emily's property than initially planned, but with the necessary characteristics for success: a clear stream, plentiful berry bushes, evidence of small prey animals, and most importantly, no signs of human intrusion. It's time, Emily told Michael in early June, when the cubs had grown to the size of small dogs, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Any longer, and they'll become too comfortable here. The night before the planned release, Emily sat alone with Hope and her cubs. The room, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through cracks in the boarded windows, held a quiet stillness. The mother bear lay on her side, cubs nursing or playing around her massive form. Hope's eyes met Emily's across the room, calm, knowing. "I'm going to miss you," Emily whispered, allowing herself this one moment of emotional indulgence. "But this is how it should be." Hope made a soft chuffing sound, neither agreement nor disagreement, just acknowledgement. Emily thought of her mother, still living in Tucson, still carrying both physical and emotional scars from her bear encounter. Emily hadn't told her about Hope, couldn't risk her reaction, couldn't bear the potential disappointment or fear. But she'd begun calling more regularly, sharing edited versions of her wildlife work, rebuilding a relationship strained by different responses to shared trauma. Perhaps someday, when the story couldn't endanger Hope's family, Emily would tell her mother how a bear had helped heal what another bear had broken. Dawn painted the eastern sky with pale gold as Emily and Michael loaded the sedated bears into specialized crates in the back of Emily's truck. The cubs, drowsy but not fully unconscious, made soft whimpering sounds. Hope lay silent, her breathing deep and regular. They drove for nearly 2 hours, the final 5 miles on a barely visible forest track that required four-wheel drive and careful navigation. When they could drive no farther, they unloaded a custom cart Emily had designed for the final portion of the journey. "Half a mile," Michael said, consulting the GPS, due east. The clearing they'd selected lay beside a crystal-clear stream, surrounded by ponderosa pines and gamble oaks that would provide both shelter and food. Summer berries ripened on nearby bushes, fish darted in the deeper pools of the stream, and fallen logs offered natural structures for the cubs to explore and climb. One by one, they positioned the bears in the clearing, arranging them so each animal would wake with clear sight lines to the others. Hope they placed centrally, her massive form a secure landmark for the cubs upon awakening. As the sedatives began wearing off, Emily and Michael retreated to the edge of the clearing, concealing themselves behind a natural blind of boulders and vegetation. Emily focused her binoculars on the bears, monitoring their return to consciousness. The cubs stirred first, their small bodies twitching as awareness returned. One by one, they rose unsteadily, blinking and sniffing the air with obvious confusion. They huddled together, making anxious sounds, clearly disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Hope woke last, her massive head raising with deliberate calm. She took in the situation with remarkable composure, first checking each cub visually, then scanning the clearing and forest beyond. Emily held her breath as Hope rose to her full height, testing the air with her sensitive nose. The mother bear hesitated, and for one terrible moment, Emily feared she might lead her cubs back toward human habitation, toward the familiar safety of Emily's cabin. Instead, Hope set her paws forward with calm dignity, moving deeper into the forest. She paused, looking back at her confused cubs, and made a low, reassuring sound. Obediently, if hesitantly, they followed, regrouping around her. At the forest's edge, Hope stopped. She turned her gaze, sweeping the clearing as if searching for something. Emily ducked lower behind the blind, but somehow, impossibly, Hope's eyes found hers. For a long moment, bear and human regarded each other across the distance, predator and prey, wild and tame, fear and healing. All boundaries dissolved in that silent exchange. Then Hope turned away, leading her family into the depths of the forest, disappearing gradually among the dappled shadows of their true home. Emily didn't realize she was crying until Michael's arm came around her shoulders. "They'll be okay," he said softly. She nodded, unable to speak. The emptiness she felt wasn't exactly loss, more like the completion of a circle, the fulfillment of purpose. Life resumed its normal patterns, though Emily found herself changed in subtle ways. She expanded her clinic to include more sophisticated wildlife rehabilitation facilities. She partnered with conservation organizations to advocate for stricter poaching enforcement. She used Hope's case, anonymized and with key details altered, as the basis for research on bear rehabilitation techniques. Michael became a constant presence in her life, their shared secret evolving into deeper connection. They moved cautiously into romance, two people accustomed to independence discovering the value of partnership. Emily finally told her mother about Hope, not everything, but enough. To her surprise, her mother listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions about bear behavior and rehabilitation. "I've been afraid for so long," her mother said afterward. "Maybe it's time I wasn't." A year after the release, Emily and Michael returned to the site for a routine survey of the area. They didn't expect to find Hope or her cubs. Successful rehabilitation meant no further human contact, but Emily wanted to confirm the habitat remained suitable for bears. Near the stream where they'd left Hope's family, Emily spotted distinctive tracks in the soil, one large paw print and 4 smaller ones leading toward deeper forest. She didn't follow them to their end, just stood there, smiling quietly. "There's no need to see them again," she told Michael, who had become her companion in both soul and purpose. "Because they've truly returned to the wild, just as they were born to do." Michael took her hand, and together they turned toward home, leaving the forest and its secrets undisturbed. In the distance, perhaps only in Emily's imagination, came the soft, contented chuff of a bear leading her cubs through dappled sunlight, wild and free and exactly where they belonged.